Hi everyone, Sean here from Unicorn Ventures, and today on the podcast, we're diving into the art of turning startups into unstoppable movements with Jonathan Englert, a serial founder and comms wizard. He does something unlike what I've seen many other people try to do. So if you are a founder who's looking at standing out in a crowd and owning your marketplace, Jonathan is the one who's going to lead the path for us. So you come from an amazing background, Jonathan. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you on board.
Oh, Sean, thanks so much for having me. I feel embarrassed by that introduction, but I'll take it for now. I'll take it.
Well, I'm actually going to give you a lot more, stuff I'm going to throw at you because you've done so much. You've been one of the first hires for GoGet car share from a scrappy 13,000 members, and you grew that to 150,000 strong powerhouse.
Yeah, I grew up with other people, but I at least I carried the comms banner, I would say.
And now you're the founder of AndIron, and we're going to dive into how you're helping and transforming in some of the accelerator programs that you're running there. But where I really want to take the audience today is your background from Columbia Journalism School. You've written for the New York Times. You've got credits on there as well, and you're also got a PhD in nonfiction writing as well. And you got into journalism, and you're an author. Not quite the same things when you're talking about structuring a story. So for those that may not have heard of you or AndIron, can you tell us about who you are, what you do, and who you do it for?
Yeah. So AndIron is a communications company that helps grow the value of the companies it works with through using a range of what we call marcoms. So that's PR, thought leadership, events, awards, a whole range of activities that are all structured around effectively the companies, which are oftentimes for-purpose companies. They're solving a problem. They're startup scale-ups that are aligned or even forging a specific movement. So we use something called a movement making methodology, which helps propel the business effectively in its growth.
I want us to start there, and then we'll walk through your career and all the exciting things that you've achieved. But how founders, what I want you guys to listen to is what are the lessons that you can take from Jonathan's journey as he drops these value bombs and how you can apply them? Because a lot of people could talk about tactics and strategies and responsible financial management to scale and take you to the next level. But what Jonathan does is he focuses on the story and how we can use that in Marcoms. By the way, that's a word I've only just learned today. and how we can actually own our story and form stronger connections and take your business forward. Does that sound cool, Jonathan?
Look, that sounds awesome. Like you got my head spinning with all the different ideas. Marcoms, for example, where does that come from? What does that actually mean? I'll dive in there. It represents a bit of a battle, right? That has been going on, at least in my world, for well over a decade, between the position of comms as it's commonly understood, involving PR and storytelling, thought leadership, etc., and then marketing, and where do they fit with it in relation to each other? So that's one area we can dig into in this. I'd also say, look, when you're describing a journey, like I think about my career, it's like to some extent an accidental career. Like I think when we look back on our lives, and I don't know if this is true, Sean, with you and how your journey would, but you're like, well, how did I end up here?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I guess without, turning it into, an epic, it started with Columbia Journalism School, over 2 decades ago, where I focused on nonfiction writing, and I started leaning towards long form writing as opposed to daily journalism.
Yeah. Right.
So when I graduated from there, I actually already had a book contract, thanks to a legendary figure at the school, Sam Friedman, who ran up until this year when he retired a book seminar that had produced over 100 published books that go into contract, which is pretty hard in the nonfiction space. It's hard to publish a book actually commercially generally, but that was my starting point. Was in going right into leaping right into this nonfiction long form world, and I was thinking while I was preparing for this, which by the way, just hats off to you, the structure with which you've shaped the discussion, the framework for this discussion is really, really helpful.
Oh,
Because it begins with that spark, right? And I was thinking, well, what was this? What was this spark? Like, what is there a unifying theme in my hodgepodge of a career, right? That actually makes sense of some of this. And I think what it what it was and what was the impetus for my first book um, was that we don't listen typically. That if or see, listen or see. What I mean is like that which there's so many parts of the world, right, where these stories remain almost hidden, but they're hidden in plain sight, right? Or discoveries, they're hidden in plain sight. And if you are fortunate enough, right, to be able to just listen and see those areas, right? And we see this in startup founders, right? Almost always, right? To someone who is in an industry and they're like, why do we do this way? Can we fix this? There's a gap. And then they build a business out of that gap. So for me, the journey was into nonfiction writing. I wrote then some technology work for the technology section of the New York Times when it existed. Still existed. The New York Times still exists, but the tech section
yeah.
doesn't. Um, and then I began to. I fast forward. I basically published books. Arrived in Australia in 2009, and needed to get a real job. The meeting, it felt like writing was a real job, right? But it wasn't a 9 to 5 job. So I got one of those nine to
Okay.
five jobs.
So what year did you come over to Australia? How long
I
ago
came
was
over
that?
in 2009.
And how old were you then?
Oh, I don't want to say because I'm
Okay.
a
Well,
lot
I'm
older
just
than
going to
I
paint the
look.
picture here. So for our audience
I
that
was I
hasn't
was
picked
I
up.
was old enough. I was old enough. I was able to I was old enough to drink,
Oh,
but
okay. So
by
for
a
our
decade.
audience, though, for if in case you just tuned in, if you haven't realized, so Jonathan was born in one of my favorite cities in the whole world, New York. So a New Yorker coming out, and I'm taking on Australia. It's 2009. I'm old enough to drink. I'm having a great time. Probably went straight to Bondi. I'm just
Yeah,
guessing.
no, look, I was a family man. Didn't go straight to Bondi. Um, needed basically had to support, family. Uh, Independent schools were on the table,
Yeah.
and didn't come cheap as it turned out. And so my writing life, which is increasingly difficult to support us, cash wise, ceded to me transferring myself into what at the time I thought was the dark side, which was PR. Right. So for anybody in the audience who doesn't know this, I know you'll know this, Sean, but the journalist, right, will look at PR and go, oh, they call it the dark side, right? Because it's conceived of you're spinning stuff, you're making stuff up, you're not going at the truth, right? I will say that in my now 15, 16 years of doing this, 15, yeah, of on the PR side, um, it's actually it actually led me to do my PhD in media, which you cited, right? Because I recognize that, in fact, journalism does its own spin. And I don't think this is any news to anybody now, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, the job of PR, and this goes to what you said about storytelling, is actually to get information out there clearly and most of the time, like to actually just get the story straight, you know? So
Yeah.
just fast forward. So I basically realized I had to get a real job, and I was fortunate enough to end up at a boutique technology PR firm.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Cool.
and that did a lot at the sort of the big end of town in terms of enterprise technology. But I was fortunate enough to kind of come in there and at a relatively high level because of, I guess, my writing background, that even though I didn't really know anything professionally about PR, I'd done some brand work prior to that in New York with individuals, sort of high profile people, getting them in media, et cetera, writing for them. Um, as part of the pastiche that one puts together when you're a writer or journalist trying to make a living.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, I came into this new role and I was able to start carving out new disciplines for them. First, I landed cybersecurity, built up their cybersecurity practice, built up their car sharing practice. That's actually where GoGet came in. We landed them. Um, but along the way, I recognized um, that I felt PR by itself had limitations. Um,
Mhm.
and so the part of the part, how can I say it? The part of the spectrum I like to work with were startups and scale ups, typically founders, people, and I think you probably can identify with my guess is, given your background, what you do, and your passion, is people who are trying to make a difference, right? They're doing something different generally, often for purpose. And they have a vision, and they're scrappy, and they are building something, right? Um, and so I found that for those people, traditional PR I didn't think worked very well, because it became traditional PR was excuse me, I don't know if you hear the background noise. It's
Nope.
all good. But traditional PR was um, shoehorned into it, so it would have to be always on. Whereas with a lot of startups and you don't necessarily always want to be on. There might be months when you want to be quiet, right? And so
Mhm.
you actually want someone who's a partner with you who's actually gets that. They get the commerciality. If they don't just going, we're flipping the switch. We need to be in front of the public now. No, not at all. Like, in fact, you're a beta version of whatever tech you're doing. Let's be quiet about that for
Yeah.
the next 6 months. That doesn't mean you don't do communications or you don't think with a communications mindset. It just means that you're parsimonious with it. Like, you're careful, right? You know what you're doing.
There's something that it's that's just calling out to me. It's about being intentional, controlling your narrative, and guiding the audience to the message in which you want to share at the right time. That's really what I'm picking up. I think that it's important to have a calm strategy because in the absence of nothing, people make up their own stories. The
Yeah.
competitors will go out there and they'll start making up things about you that aren't necessarily true. But owning that space about what is your story, your authentic, genuine brand voice, or your mission, your purpose, and then tying everything in, that is in essence the art form. Did you find that, when you said to yourself, okay, I'm not just writing stories anymore, I'm actually building communications that scale businesses, was Go Get a really big, I guess, pivotal moment for yourself and said, well, this is
Well,
what we're doing is impactful?
it was, look, it was from um, understanding the movement philosophy that underpins what AndIron does now. Um, that grew. I gradually became aware of that, right, as a value, as a different way of approaching the issue of, say, yeah, where storytelling actually just becomes a part of that, right? The movement making.
Mhm.
Um, and we can get into that a little later. Go Get did represent a movement, right? Because it was part of the sharing economy. And so any place where you could speak about the value of, say, not owning an asset, but using it on a shared basis, and how that contributes to the environment, right? How it contributes to affordability, communities, all of this stuff, right? Even health. That then becomes, that's a movement, right? You can go, oh, that's something that you can say, hey, it's larger than this commercial enterprise, but we're a kind of leading edge of
Mhm.
that movement. But actually, for me, the breakthrough, and I was thinking about these. Remind me to come back to it on the value bomb piece, because when you put you put a you know you put the pressure on with this idea of dropping a value bomb. But is that what you said? Value bomb?
Yeah, valuable. Yeah. Yeah,
Far
I
out.
guess what
Far
I
out. Because I actually have one. I think it's most of my wisdom comes from watching, my own and other people's unforced errors in life. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so I definitely have one value bomb. Just remind me about the naming of a
Yeah, we'll
company.
save it to the end so that our viewers have to watch it, and watch the whole episode.
Yeah,
So if we
exactly.
drop it too early, they might tune out.
Honestly, no, 100%. It's a good one though. It's a really good one. It has to do with naming a company, and getting, let's just say getting early PR. I'll just
Okay.
plant that flag there. And the danger of, but the real turning point for me and what convinced me to start AndIron in 2013 is when I left the boutique agency. They were twofold. The first was that the enterprise end of town, right, the big tech companies, they paid the same amount for PR, right, as the little guys, right?
Yeah.
They paid the same amount, and in fact, and they were ungrateful for it because they didn't have skin in the game, right? So if they showed up on the front page of the Fin Review, they'd be like, "Oh, that's just a tick box, right?
Yeah.
That's just a box we're ticking.
That's
Thanks
just
for
a
getting there for
Tuesday.
us."
Yeah.
Exactly. But if you get a founder right on the front page of the Fin Review or Wall Street Journal, or you've got really palpable, genuine value there, right? That you can talk about traceability of media or PR or thought leadership or any of this, you can almost always, they'll feel it, is the bottom line. And so for me, the breakthrough was a lot of PR is done on an hourly basis, right? So you bill by the hour. And we had a company come to us, an entrepreneur who had a cybersecurity company, and he was one of the pioneers of security operations centers in Australia. And um, we built his profile over a period of about a year, right? Because he was a very smart guy, very interesting, and we started getting him really out there in the media. And what happened was that he was in the process then, as we discovered, of selling his business. And so you had the likes of, Telstra, Dimension Data, others circling, big companies circling, to the sales process. And I was convinced by the end of it that we had added, maybe 10 million to his value, right? To the value of
Yeah.
that sale price, right? And so I thought about it and it hit me. I thought, well, time and materials, right, doesn't really make sense in the space that I'm getting interested in, right? It doesn't, it's like, because I could have an idea in the shower, right? That is the product of all of these different pieces that are coming together, all my experience, but also, my knowledge of the landscape, my knowledge of the technology, of the media landscape as well. And it's going to add value, right? Because it's going to make them unique. And I thought I'd rather have equity in the company or something else, right? And I certainly don't want to bill that. Like, it doesn't make sense to go, oh, that was 2 minutes, right? How do you bill that, right?
And I think, but you also bring up something really interesting is that when
Yeah,
a lot of people work with creative agencies or any agencies, they go, well, show me your hours. It's like, I don't just switch on. It's not like a 9 to 12 thing. I'll be thinking about you at 8 o'clock at night
yeah,
and sacrificing family time because I just had this idea pop up and I'm not present here. So I like where you're going with this. I think
yeah.
a smarter way to go. It puts you with skin in the game, puts them skin in the game as well. Did you have many people that said, "Oh, hold on, I don't want to pay anymore because there's a lot of upside here now for you"?
Yeah, well, no, it's funny, right? Like, so that's been its own journey, right? Which I certainly can talk about, right? Because so then when I started AndIron, it was on my own, right? And basically what happened was I was able to bring existing company that I'd already won, and then added a friend of mine actually. Well, I was sort of a new friend who said, "Oh, I'm going to need what you guys do. What do you?" And I said, "Oh," and it suddenly became clear that I had like a business that I could do it, right? Like I was just
Mhm.
like, I didn't even know what to charge, right? But I was like, "Oh, I'll just charge what I'm charging the other guys." Um, and that's what I'll do. And it was, I was already making a little more money than I would been making. And I was on my own, right? And then there was a lot of learning, right, over the years. And gradually, I added people. I built first an ecosystem of kind of independent contractors, like-minded people who I knew really were good quality, people who could do things like, video or other marketing components and things like that. But they gradually, that's formalized, right? So we have a team um, who can execute across a range of things.
And you have
Uh,
offices in Sydney and New York, right?
we don't have anybody in New York. I have people who we work with in the US.
I was giving you a tax opportunity right there. Going, oh yeah, I absolutely go to New York to do
I do
work.
though. Thank you very much. Let's formalize that. I do go to New York for business. So, which is true. Um, which is true. In fact, we have one of our companies that we represent is based in the state. Well, they have a major office in the States.
Hmm.
And we've since done quite a bit. In the early days, it was mainly Australian companies, but we've done a lot with Australian companies that are globalizing into, they're taking their tech and going into new markets or taking their offerings. So yeah, that's been good. But yeah.
Can I ask you a
I was
question?
just thinking, so
Yeah.
basically I started that and that's how it got going. And then we effectively built over time, a portfolio that has specialties in cybersecurity,
Mm.
AI, um, uh, still the sharing economy, and clean tech has been a big one for us, an area that's just cumulatively grown. So we have 4 or 5 companies in clean tech.
Now, sometimes, I imagine you've come across this. You've had some executives or founders that they talk about traceability. How can I guarantee the return on investment of working with a PR firm or a creative agency? You've heard this, right?
Uh-huh.
So, well, I've thought about one of the other things that you do that I think is genius is that you also become as an equity partner with businesses, and the fact that it puts you to have skin in the game. So if you can help them grow and you all grow together. I love that strategy. Do they see that as being different? Is it a different conversation you're having with people other than saying, oh, the return on investment we can expect is X?
Yeah, look, we're very strongly relationship driven. We have long-term relationships with companies we work with. They're built on trust. You know, we have, unlike a kind of supplier arrangement, we really see ourselves as oftentimes part of the leadership, at least at the leadership table with the companies we work with. So closely aligned, right? With
Mm.
their overall sort of mission, value, vision, drive, but also the commercial drive. Um, and so the equity question can come out naturally, should arise naturally, like depending on the stage of the company. Um, we're pretty selective in terms of that piece. But it is a way of showing, you have skin in the game. And that you're just, you want to grow. You're basically, you're growing with the company. In terms of showing the value, right? Our sweet spot is oftentimes someone who has already built a company and exited, and they understand the value of what we do. Uh,
Mm.
how can I say it? Regardless of actual, you know, connect the dots ROI, right?
Yeah.
Because they've seen the cumulative effect of it. Because it is by nature, right? Very qualitative. If you show up in the Wall Street Journal, you get a great story in the Wall Street Journal, that might lead to one deal, right? That remakes your company. How do you value that? This is not, we're not talking about B2C in this case, right? It's in a B2B or investment play. So that's one thing. But the other thing we're seeing, that's emerging now, and it's kind of a confirmation of something we've believed. And so we have to be careful, right? Because cognitive bias, confirmation bias
Yeah.
can blind us, right? Leads to things. But it is something of a confirmation of something we believed a long time, which is that if you kind of put out the entirety, a comprehensive story, and you keep it coherent and consistent and interesting, that it has value. So what we're seeing emerge now, though, in the age of the LLM, um, is that there's a that the LLMs are shaping effectively what gets presented to someone when they're searching with, a ChatGPT or a Claude or
Yeah.
whatever.
So
And
for our audience, we're talking about AI when you're using ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity. They're
exactly.
talking about LLMs being large language models that go out
Yes.
and search and all the information on the internet and bring it back. So I guess you're right. The
Yeah.
consistent
So,
messaging is really important on that.
well, what's interesting about it is that, traditionally, right, in the digital age, we've had search, right? And so if we were working with a company for 2 or 3 years, you know, um, if you do a Google search, what is this company? Before you had an AI driven answer, you would have a um, you would have a list, right? Just a straight list, and based on the SEO. I mean, I'm telling people how to suck eggs here, but basically based on the SEO, you'd have a rough story of what this company was appearing, right? You'd say, oh, they announced this, or they did this thing, or this is this they're this other thing, and you'd see it, right? On the search. Well, LLMs and AI, as we call it, right? They're aggregating all this and actually putting it into narrative form. So now, obviously, if you ask what is the Unicorn Podcast, you're going to get at some point a synopsis that's going to appear there, but it's also going to appear in ChatGPT. It's going to be, and to the extent that that is credible and comprehensive, it's basically going to be based on third party accreditation. Maybe I'm taking too long to explain this, but
No,
basically
no, I
it
love it.
increases it increases the value of getting in journalism, right? Getting in media. It increases the value of having a Wikipedia entry. It increases the value of being on Reddit. It increases the value of having very good um, language architecture. It sounds so wanky. Um, Good information on your website, right?
Yeah. No,
Um,
I totally agree. And what you're saying, and we all often believe that we never tell people to suck eggs because we don't know our audience, and sometimes it's best just to bring it right
yeah,
back down. So in the internet of things, the days of Google, search engine optimization, SEO was based around keywords based on your search.
yeah,
How is that relative to the search coming back to what you're asking? But what we're seeing with AI is people aren't saying a dentist near me or what's the Unicorn Ventures podcast. What they're saying is, why should I listen to the Unicorn Ventures podcast? And it'll give a whole reason, a variety of
that's right.
reasons based off all the interviews and all the value that we bring every week to our audience.
No, 100%. No, and exactly. And over time, Sean, you're bringing
Yeah.
great value. Um, over time, that story accumulates, right? And it
Yeah.
gets reinforced. And then there's the idea of, is it going to be recommended by AI? Because AI recommendations matter. So there's not only a question of, is what the LLM is picking up on actually conforming to who you actually are as a company or a venture, right?
Are we
But
seeing that
is
people's
the AI
buying?
actually recommending you?
Yeah, are we
Right.
seeing a change in people's buying decisions when
Yeah.
they're
So
using
that
AI?
so we were having a lot of round the table discussions in the last 3 months, right? Saying, how do we convey to our sort of our neighborhood of client companies, right? Particularly the ones where there might be more of an ROI question, like the actual value of what we're doing. And then um, somewhat coincidentally, it was coincidentally, I was giving a talk, and someone came up and said, "Oh, this is what we're doing," and they showed me basically a platform, um, and I was like, "Well, this is really interesting," which assesses conformity of what the LLM is seeing and saying to the story, and the likelihood of recommendation, which, to your question about what's the metric, apparently it's 3 to 5 times. So meaning that if AI recommends something, the person being recommended, I mean, two, would be 3 to 5 times more likely to say engage, buy, etc., than if it was a straight sort of SEO, sort of like search result, where they're effectively doing their own research. So it's a big difference, right? But it also interesting is full circle, right? Because to the questions of good faith and the fundamentals that typically build trust in story, informational fundamentals that make people go, oh, trust and explore your brand, your technology, etc.
Here's some key metrics that I think our audience will appreciate. One, when it comes to marketing, people need to hear your messaging 7 to 11 times before they'll even consider
Classic,
working
right?
with you. 80% of all buying decisions are made by women. 90% of a buying decision is made before they even reach out or go to a store, and it's all done online. And now you're telling me that through AEO or AI and LLMs collecting information, the propensity to buy increases by 3 to 5 times. That's incredible. That
Yeah.
is cool.
Yeah, it is crazy. I mean, look, again, I would put probably those, I put those the 3 to 5 in quotes at this, we're early stage here, but I don't think, I don't think it'd be a huge, intuitive leap, right? To imagine that it would be stronger, much stronger,
No.
than just because the perception is, and this is actually not to go off on a complete tangent, but this is one of the problems with LLMs from a storytelling perspective, right? Is that, and actually from a functional perspective, is that they can completely bullshit you with such confidence, certainty, and good humor that they that you buy it, you know.
I
And
got
but what's interesting about this technology that we're vetting right now is that because we're on the inside of the story, like because we built it, the story, when we see what AI comes back with and the alignment with what the story is, it's a moment where you go, wow, that's like it's pretty amazing.
yeah.
That it's because you've hit it, like you've communicated to a degree that it's clear.
And that meant that chasm of trust is suddenly filled, or that bridge has been built over because it's that consistent that someone else searching it, it just validates what they're already thinking.
Yeah, and actually, to add to that, imagine, someone contacts you based on the LLM, right? On that description, and they go, "Oh yeah, and I know, how like when someone looks you up, like say they got a sense of your biography, right? And they're like, "Oh, and you were doing this thing." And you're like, "Nah, nah, I wasn't doing that thing. Like I did that for a month, but that
Yeah.
doesn't define who I am, right?"
Yeah.
It's that type of thing. The closer that the hand in glove of that information that's out there with the actual reality, the better. And one of the things we often say to like our clients is that we go in early and we go, I don't want to hear what you think you are. Like I don't want to read your website. If we're gonna, if as part of our process, we might redesign your website or
Mhm.
rewrite it because it's like the light from a distant star. It's where you were maybe a year ago, and there's
Yeah.
going to be also, and so I'd rather hear like, who are you actually right now? What are you right now?
Let's,
And
yeah.
that's what the LLMs are going to be doing more of because they're going to be doing this closer to real time, because they're going to be weighing up, oh yeah, that article was 3 years ago, but then there's this more recent article. So in the Google rankings, that article from 3 years ago would still be above the article, you know what I mean, from
Yeah.
the more recent article. So there's all sorts of implications.
And we think about academics, you're always looking for recency of
Yeah.
proof. So yeah, I didn't even think of that. I think that's such an interesting take on that.
Yeah. Well, I haven't thought of it until we're starting to think about it. But when you start extrapolating, right,
Mhm.
it's, it does build
Cool.
that.
Something that I've loved in looking at the clients that you work with and some of the content you're pushing out, you certainly seem to be partnering with people that are making very innovative, effective change, like substantial change, but with a purpose as well. That seems to be a common thread that you've attached yourself to. I don't know, is that a conscious thing of terms of like you could work with anyone? What is your selection criteria about determining who you choose to work with and help grow?
Well, I'll tell you, you know what? It's the first selection criteria, and it's gonna, you won't bleep me on this one, but it really is no asshole policy.
Yeah.
Um, and that's proven to be really effective at helping, how can I say it? Like giving us the energy. I can go briefly into that. I don't know if you have a view on this one, but my take on this is that early on, I saw that if you had someone, they could be decent people. This is the thing about the asshole, right? You can be a decent person. It's not that you're a bad person. It's that there's some hang up where you suck energy out. But you either make ridiculous demands, right?
Mm.
Or you have expectations that can never get in line, or you're ornery, you just kind of don't, and the energy in the space that we work in, right? Because we there's a strong client service piece, even though we see ourselves as partners, right? The reason why also left traditional PR is that PR often says it's strategic, right? We're strategic, right? But the second a client says, "Oh, do this," even as stupid as, it's just a stupid clown show idea, um, they do it. Like they do it, and that's not what we do, right?
Yeah.
We're like, look, I'm not the soup Nazi. Like, I'm not saying, like no soup for you, but but because we are client facing, and we serve, right? We serve, and there's a value in that. It's really important. But we don't serve mindlessly. Like, we're partners. We a key thing is for us to be at that table, the leadership table, where we're sharing that vision. You're talking about the vision, right? So we're sharing that vision. But the no asshole policy is really about that which would drain from us, drain from the engagement, right? Drain from the enterprise. It's usually a pretty good indicator of whether the company's going to do well, also, particularly early stage. And why I say that is because sometimes one definition would be, you'd have a founder who, they're going a million miles an hour. That's not bad, right? They're strong, they're, energy great, but they think they can do everything. They can wear every hat, right?
Mm.
So they're not only the technical lead, right? They're also the marketing lead, or you know what I mean, or like
Yeah.
the government policy lead, or whatever. And you're like, no, you can understand it, and you're really smart, and you can understand those areas, but you do not have competency in those areas, or you do not have sufficient
The
competency
depth, the
and
depth of
depth and
experience.
experience
Mm.
that, this goes obviously to the intelligence question, right? Like, I remember I went to law school briefly. That's another hodgepodge
Did
piece.
you?
So yeah, I
Where'd
did.
you go to law school?
Fordham Law in New York.
Oh, okay.
Um, and I enjoyed it. I did pretty well, but I quickly realized that there would be a conflict with that career and what I actually wanted to do with my life. So I left. But one of the things that they used to say is that the A students became professors, the B students became corporate lawyers, and the C students became the millionaires. And which is, and the reason the C students became millionaires is they didn't necessarily have the intellectual or legal breadth of mind to to say, be at that professorial level, to have that
Yeah.
true mastery, say, of the law, cognitively. But they would focus on one area of the law, right? And then
Yeah.
just hammer away at it,
Go nation deep.
niche
Yeah.
and deep, right? And then they become, and so the point is, often, so that's when you find a founder who's going to wear all those hats. I get worried. They're like, "Oh, I'm going to graphic design. I'm going to do this," and it's just like, I mean, the best type of engage really founder, when I see it where it's really going to work, is when the founder is basically like, "I want to build a strong foundation. I get it. I'm not the graphics guy. I'm going to defer on that, and I'm going to get someone good to help with there. I'm going to do, but also be flexible, right? You don't need to do everything perfectly from day one. I think
Yeah.
that's an important point. Like, you can run, you can run on fumes for quite a long way, you
I think
know?
that's what you're talking about. There's a crossroads because when you're talking about a founder that's wearing multiple hats, two things come to my mind. One, it's ego. I'm better than everyone else and I can do a better job than anyone else.
Yes.
Or it was a necessity. Out of necessity, I started this in my garage. It was just me. I had to do all these things. And now I'm trying to scale, but I haven't learned to let go.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is you have to be flexible enough to take on the advice of people who actually have depth and experience in these and surround yourself with those people that can do it so you can actually be the CEO, what you've always wanted, and drive the
Yeah.
vision and move everything forward.
Yeah. And that letting go is a really vital point. I had a founder of a company, a pretty successful one, say to me once, and it's always stuck with me. This is in the early days of AndIron, that eventually a founder, in many cases, needed to step away from the business, or they would become toxic to that business.
Hmm.
And, you know, the same guy who said, tech founders will think that the solution to every problem is tech, is more technology,
Yeah.
and and oftentimes it's not. But that always stuck with me because I've seen it, and it's not something you can immediately quantify. It's more like the mysterious handbrake. When you wonder, you're like, why aren't they growing at that rate? This company, why, and it's like that handbrake of toxicity, toxic handbrake, we could call it,
Yeah.
I don't know. But that, yeah, yeah. So I'm trying to think where I was, but yeah, that's
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. In fact, it makes me think about it. The companies that you have advised to, like Zip Money, Smart Solar, the Good and Fugly we talked about as well, across those businesses and other businesses that you've had exposure and awareness to, is there two to three common places where growing businesses tend to stumble when it comes to comms and marketing,
yeah, yeah.
to help them grow?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a really good question. I think, I think the first, like, if there was one value bomb, don't hire marketing full time.
Okay.
I honestly, I don't, I seldom see the value in that early on.
Mhm.
I mean, put my hand up, there's a conflict of interest because we can usually manage that. Okay.
Don't
But,
hire them full
but
time. Hire us. Yeah.
exactly. But the reason we landed on that place, right, is because frequently when a company reaches a certain stage, right, where they're big enough where we think, okay, there's a marketing resource here. Remember, sometimes we have equity in the company, right? Um, we'll say we'll help hire that marketing, right? Because it's when you need someone to oftentimes sort of execute a lot,
Yeah.
right? So that means a lot of collateral, a lot of sales support,
Operational
material.
support, like they
It's
said.
almost operational marketing.
Yeah.
But when in the early days, if someone comes to me and they're going to go, oh, say I see something like I see a lot of investor decks, right? We sometimes help, well, we do with investment rounds, et cetera. But and I see, oh, yeah, this is going to be for marketing hires. Like I would be really hard. It depends on the kind of company, and it depends on size of the raise and all that, their ambitions and what they're doing. But I would be you most of the time quite skeptical of that. Um,
What
but
are
the
some
flip
other
side,
red flags that come out for you when you're looking at investor decks as well? Okay, it's like marketing hires full time. Is there anything else you go like, or conversely, you could think of when you see investor deck, you go, team, we're on this like ASAP now. Let's go. What is it that
right?
stands out for
Yeah,
you?
partnering. With the the thing that gets I think overestimated, and I understand it because it's a it's an emotional thing, right? But is when a company goes, oh yeah, we're selling into this big company and this other big company and this other, and they're saying, oh yeah, we're just going to close the deal and it'll be done in a month. We'll be able to announce it in a month. I, I'm thinking it's 6 months.
Yeah.
It'll be a year. And not only that, you're never going to be able to announce it because they're not going to let you announce it, you know? So that, so those kinds of things, that kind of exuberance. One of the things that's music to my ears is when um is founders oftentimes being reversed ageism here. This should be a alert, right? Politically incorrect reverse ageism going on here is that older founders who've been around a
Yeah.
while, who have relatively mature they're both urgent in what they're doing, but they're also they're realistic in terms of how long is this actually going to take, right? For say
Mhm.
you were going to be partnering with a bank, right? Like you it's going to you probably will not be able to announce it that you're working with them, right?
Mhm.
Or say in cybersecurity, a lot of the time you just simply can't talk about your client.
Why is that? Just for our audience. So I got this contract. It's great. It can help build my authority, and
Yeah.
it's like a newsworthy story. It could put me on Financial Times. But what are the things that are stopping them
It,
from should they or can't be talking?
well, this is where speaking comms matters, right? Like understanding, like the first thing I would say is, and this is what we do, right? Is we'll always ask, please get us in the loop somewhere, right?
Mhm.
Because we will then be speaking to the people who actually make these decisions in terms of the communication side of it, right? Whether something's going to be announced. So say you make a deal, right? You're supplying something to a bank or just a large company, um, they're going to have their own timelines, their own people managing marketing initiatives, PR, etc. They're going to have, and there's going to be a lot going on in the scenes. And the high likelihood is you're not speaking to the people who, say you're speaking to a facilities management manager, right? Well, that person is not in the comms department. They're not in marketing.
Mhm.
They're going to have to reach. So we saw this frequently in solar, right? With commercial solar installations projects, energy projects, where the people that our companies were speaking to were the engineers, the people on the ground, right? Physical plant guys, but they were a few people distant from the marketing and comms. So it took a lot of cut through, and then of course the priorities of the company might not be in line with announcing something. And so say cybersecurity is a good example of that, right? If you're a company that you're trying to harden your systems, right, against a breach, against hackers, whatever, you really want to say who you're working with? Like what tech stacks? I mean,
Puts you at risk, and
yeah, exactly. I mean, it gives someone a little bit more advantage over you. So it's things like that, right?
I could almost imagine someone
Yeah,
going, we've identified this as a huge risk within our business, so therefore we're putting it here. And it does 8 out of 10 things we need to do. We're still trying to figure out these two areas. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. The other
yeah,
the other part you bring up is that with those legacy ASX listed companies, they're not mom and pop operators. You might be dealing with a facilities manager, but they're on the operations channel, and that has a GM, and that goes up that side. And then over here you have sales, you have marketings, you have solar, and there's all these things. And then it all goes up to the executive team. Then the executive team sends the mandate for what we're trying to achieve and our key milestones for the year, and our
that's right.
KPIs, and the shareholders, what we've announced to market and what they expect from us. And unless you're actually got all that aligned, and that takes time, man.
It
Like
takes
that's
so much time.
so much
And
time.
exactly. And then there's an attendant risk, right? Or an adjacent, let's call it the adjacent risk. So then you have the founder, right? Who's like, but we've won these guys. This is a story. I'm going to announce it somewhere. I'm going to do it on LinkedIn, right? Or I'm going to do it somewhere else. And like they're literally shooting themselves in the foot, right? Or not literally, sorry,
Yeah,
figuratively.
yeah.
Let's make sure we get that, do this properly. Um, Look, they are, because what's going to happen is any large enterprise has, say they even go to PR, get PR themselves independently, right? Which, by the way, might be unlikely, because journalists will oftentimes, if they actually land a journalist, the journalist is going to go, oh, well, I want a quote from this other party,
Yeah.
right? So that might put a break on that. But the point is that it's going to get picked up, right? I mean, it's going to get picked up, and they probably won't be happy. This partner probably won't be happy, because I've been on the receiving end of that, right? Where I've discovered in the news someone announcing a partnership with one of our companies, right?
Yeah.
And it really pisses you right off. It really does.
There's so
Big,
many key stakeholders that people
yeah,
are thinking about, right?
exactly. And it's like the key here. And then you think, well, why would it? It's not a big deal. You're a big company, right? Well, it's trust, actually, so much in what we do, right? And I believe, you know, it's interesting, when you talk about the hodgepodge of the journey, and I think as a writer, as a journalist, like what does business have to offer? Like the kind of work that I do here with AndIron. Well, it's actually a tremendously almost a spiritual and philosophical. It's a very human thing, right? You discover
Mm.
quite a lot about what ultimately matters in terms of how we interact, and the trust piece, it flows through all of these interactions, right? Because you're a partner, you're entering your new business, right? New startup, you're selling something. Trust to me is really, really critical. It's,
Yeah.
making sure these big partners can say, even if it takes another 12 months, right, for them to announce it. Or if it takes the second tranche of sales, you know, or the next system that you just installed for them or whatever, for them to finally announce something or do a joint, it will likely be worth it, you know?
Mm. When you're
Do you know what
building a
I'm saying?
business,
Like, yeah.
yeah, yeah. When you're building a business or a brand or a client experience and your Marcoms, I'm going to use that every day now, Marcoms, and or journalism. But I think anything of significance where you're looking at building a connection with an audience, trust is always at the forefront. If you
Yeah.
break that, your business, like we see in politics, and I think you had some experience in writing for the West Wing side and some of the power
Oh, that's
play.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I have. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Including a
So,
former U.S. senator. That was an interesting story. So, but that's
hold on,
for another
I
time.
want to hear about that one. But
Probably get in
let's
trouble.
just pause that because that's where I'm talking about, right? Because
Yeah.
let's choose politics where there's so many spin doctors and the angles and so forth. Politics doesn't have a high degree of trust. So maybe you can talk about an experience of what you're looking to achieve when you're writing at that level in that arena versus, or whether similarities or versus approach that you would do in working with your partners. Can you draw any parallels?
Yeah, well, look, I think the biggest thing you've just sort of, sparked by saying what you said was one of the most undervalued, it seems to me, qualities that you can actually actively develop for your company, particularly if you're a startup, right? In the startup scale up space, is
Mhm.
good faith, is good fa an impression that you have good intentions, and you are basically pushing forward with those good intentions. The reason I say that is because so so someone might look at the common currency of PR is conceived of as a press release, right? A media release, right?
Yeah.
Now there's media releases and there are media releases, right? You read an ASX media release and it's just the facts, right? Because from a regulatory point of view, from the scrutiny, there's limits to what you couldn't put in there. But even there, right? You can have a really good quote. You can have something that's, you can do something that's color, right? But I would typically argue that your own press release, non-ASX, right? If you're going to use that as a document, and it can be a good one to get out to media, like really write it well. You know what I mean? Like put put your mission in there. Like put other things in there. And if you're a founder or a start, always tell that story. Keep telling that story, you know? Um, because until the whole world knows it, like no one knows it, you know? So
Nailed it.
does that, you know what I mean? And it's like,
Yeah.
so people critically, and one of the things, and this is actually, I actually, so I did really shithouse marketing research for the name AndIron in Australia, right?
Tell me about the
And
background where you landed.
yeah, there are two reasons, right? The first reason is because no one knows what an andiron is in Australia, right? It's just not part of the language. It's English, right? But it's not used. It's used in England and the US, and it's a fire grate. The second thing is that Australians can pronounce just about any combination of vowels and consonants. So they're like have this dramatic, they literally in English, they have a wide vocal range. Or yeah. However, the two words and iron have proven to be so hard for
I'm
Australians.
Canadian Australian. Like
Yeah.
been so hard for me. And aren't yeah, I think if
I
I was
know,
Irish,
I
if you
know.
had an
So
Irish
it's like
accent,
it's
then
like the worst. It's
iron.
but it's super easy for an American, right? And iron. It's
Yeah.
really easy. And anyway, the point for the reason I chose it is an andiron is a fire grate. And
Mhm.
what I was seeing in the early days of working with founders, right, was that there was all this heat and light, but it was going lots of different directions, right? Things were changing constantly. And the type of person who oftentimes starts something has a lot of different interests and a lot of, is quite what's the word for it? Protean, the kind of changing a bit, in there, which is important. But the fire grate serves what I guess the way I think of it is that it's using communications to form this framework that keeps that heat and light burning sustainably, coherently, more coherently. Fire can burn coherently than it would have otherwise, and so so that telling your story, right, until you are so, bored of it yourself, that's necessary, right? That's what a professional does. A professional goes, the whole world hasn't heard my story. I'm going to keep telling it. I'm not going to go, oh, I'm now inventing this new thing or doing this other thing. And that's where a lot of founders actually fall into problems in my experience, right? They're like, oh, not only can my device do this, it can also do this other thing. Well, I mean, actually, the gap you were solving was doing the first thing, right? That's
Yeah.
and yes, maybe it can do those things, and those are ancillary benefits, right? But the primary thing is the primary thing, right? And you
Absolutely.
stick to
I think where I've seen the best CEOs and operators is they might do new product development, they might do a slight pivot, but they never lose sight of the opportunity to tell the reason why. And you see this,
yeah,
and so many founders or business owners, managers, they go, "Oh, I don't want to talk to my customers about our top three reasons why they should work with us because I've already told them." Chances are they haven't heard you and they haven't listened. We need to hear a message 7 to 11 times before it even sinks through our thick skulls. So the best CEOs and founders, and I think you
yeah,
said professionals are the ones that go, "Hey, Jimmy, what's that? You're packing that over here? Okay, look, I want you to remember why we're doing this and the effect of that change. And the way that you're packing that box, and when they open it, that's a representation of our company. And what we're looking to achieve are these three things. Remember that, all right?" And they
yeah.
just tell them the story over and over again to everyone within their business and outside their business. So true.
It's the way you've put that is excellent, because we forget it. We forget that so easily. Like it's
Or we
taken
get bored
us.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah, we get bored of it. But this is the thing. When I said that the original impetus, the spark for me, right, going right back to journalism school, and this is now figuring into my research and some of my other book writing that I'm doing. But is this idea of listening and seeing, not seeing, not hearing, not really, because we don't do that. Like, and we now know, right, much even more than we did 25 years ago. The drivers of some of the places we fall into a blindness, right? Like the cognitive, just how powerful cognitive bias is, and the many types of cognitive bias that shape our our perceptions, like anchoring bias, where we hear misinformation and then that misinformation is corrected at a later time, and then we revert to the misinformation. Our brain goes back to that initial piece. So things like that, you're always fighting against that tide. And it struck me that the listening and the seeing is what ultimately is so critical, right? And you only and so one of the things that we do and have kind of developed over time that seems to work with founders is that we have a disciplined method around listening to them
Yeah.
to elicit their stories, right? We call it the core story, but it can be, you can call it anything, but it's a method that's just basically where it's like, just tell me, you're going to feel like you're repeating yourself. But at moments when you're telling me this, you're actually going to go, oh my God, I didn't see that like until I said it to you, you know? So it's an interactive type of listening, but it's important because all of us are just up against it every day, right? We're right at the coal face. We're responding, reacting, you know. We're not taking, we don't have space, even when we think we have space to have that reflection and to harvest that. And so it's like what you're saying, you know, the person's packing the box and you're like, this is the why of what you're doing. It's connected to these other things. And suddenly that why gets packed into the box, right? Through the method of how they're packing the box. Yeah, it really, it becomes, and then it becomes a competitive advantage, you know,
Mm.
because people are also, I think, um, people identify with that. When you have a strong mission or movement, you know, you're part of a movement, people take that on board, whether they
I
can articulate it or not, actually.
I see that a lot in politics, and I think American politics do it really well. Toe the party line.
Yeah,
If I say something here, I want everybody to be saying it in every interview, in every press conference. They're verbatim saying the same thing. They
yeah,
may
yeah,
change it next month, and maybe that's the inconsistency that makes trust fall away. But in the moment, they really understand that. I guess the challenges for businesses is how do you establish not the party line, but your core story?
mm,
How do you get the guidance that, helps you refine it? And how do you get everyone develop the narrative that helps people be able to communicate that across all levels in their business? And how do you make sure you're consistent in your press releases and
yeah,
iron? That's how. So,
yeah. Well, no, thanks for the plug. But look, I mean, the way you do it, like it, and I think it can be. I think in a sense anyone can do it. They have to be, you know, you used the word intentional before. I think the intentionality is important, right? It's a consciousness of what you're doing, but it's recognizing. I would start with hierarchies of 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 um of those messages, right? Like, so the key one is that what you said, right? It's like, why did I start this thing to begin with, right?
Mhm.
Now, it's highly unlikely that if you started something, right, to fill a gap, particular gap that you saw, say an industry, you're an industry expert in some area, right? You're like, oh, I can't believe we're not doing this. Why don't we do it this way? And I'm going to start this thing, right? That story's not going to change ever,
Yeah,
right? Ever.
it's a
Um,
genesis, right?
right? It's
Yeah.
locked in. So there we go. We've got one permanent piece, right? Because what frequently happens is you see in the investment process, you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and I'm sure you've seen this, right? Like lots of cooks in the kitchen, but you know, potential investors, investment advisors, whatever, you know, and they're all going, "Oh no, you're this, you're that, you should be this. I want more of that, or whatever." And some of that's valuable, but if you have a core understanding what you are, right? You'll understand the places. This part's not going to change. This part's not going to change, right? Right? This part, oh, is going to change slightly so I can bridge to this next point that someone's just made up.
Complementary,
Yeah,
aligned.
but
Yeah.
but you don't. But once you've created that message kind of universe, that world, you don't have to reconfigure it a whole lot. And so one thing we really like is the message house, right? Where we have multiple off of the back of the core, you have multiple streams that would deal with the various verticals that you might be encountering. So maybe you have a B2B play, right? And then you have a B2C play, right? You know, and then you have a B2B to C play. Who knows? But
Yeah.
those are all going to be slightly different. But you don't reinvent, right? You know, you don't reinvent the entire story for those. Um,
Yeah.
you can always drop elements out, you know, things you don't communicate.
Do
But
you find that that's a big problem or not so much. People being distracted by the shiny silver balls over here, where they were so close, but because they weren't getting the results that they, had hoped to, because we overestimate what we can achieve in a short amount of time.
That's right.
Um, and then all of a sudden, you could see that they were so close, and they go, you know what, we're pivoting, we're doing this now, and it's like we're reinventing ourselves. When the reality is, if you're just focusing or being that little bit more consistent for a little bit longer, you probably could have got there. Is that something you've seen in your
Yeah,
experience?
all the time, all the time.
Okay.
And yeah. Look, so we do a fair bit of work with, almost I don't know what the term would be for it. I'm sure there's a technical term for this. But like almost a foundational, a disruptive type of technology, right? That is
Yeah.
such that it's powerful, like what it does, but you don't have the use cases for it yet,
Okay.
right? You can imagine, but it's only actually encountering the wider world, bringing that out there, and then probably testing it, right? That you begin to go, oh, no, 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 that original use case, the one that I was so emotionally attached to, is not where it's going to go. It's not going to go there. It's not going to fly there, right? There's no interest in that. Um, we, yeah, um, we have one currently that deals with metal extraction, right?
Okay.
And it basically began life in a lab where they were going, oh, well, this is great for purifying water, right? But the cost to use it to purify water made it not commercially viable. Like there was no one is going to pay for this type of pure water. It's going to be really, really pure, but no one's going to pay that. However, someone was visiting the lab and said, what's the byproduct of this pure water? Well, they were perfectly extracting minerals from and metals from that water
What do we do with that?
into their own individual, right? So suddenly, what was way too expensive from a water purification point of view was dirt cheap for a critical mineral and metal extraction point of view, like
Yeah.
ridiculous cheap. And it was it's an ambient temperature extraction process. And why is it fundamental? Well, it's because we've been doing froth flotation and other things like that in mining for a long time. There hasn't been, like, 100 years, more than that. There hasn't really been something like this. So that's a good example, right? Of if you got so attached to your original story, like we're the pure water company. Well, you've already painted yourself into a box. So part of the core story, in my opinion, is like understanding that it shouldn't be a closed, you're not putting yourself into painted yourself in a corner. You're not doing that. You're trying to build a platform that I think you can grow from.
Yeah.
So the core there is the discovery of this technology, right? Then the second layer to that is, oh, and then we discovered that this is what it was really good for. And then that third layer is going to be, oh, and then we discovered it was really good for copper sulfide extraction, or it was really good for this other thing, And so then, you know what I'm saying? That's the hierarchy.
Yeah. And then they can close the loop and saying, we've generated so much revenue and money. Now we formed up this charitable foundation that brings purified water into under disadvantaged places in the world. And there's the closed loop, and you go, yay, that's amazing.
You just no, that's not a joke. That was brilliant, and
It's
it's so
yours.
interesting.
You
And
got until mid-Jan.
I got into Magenta too. No, but look, I think that's exactly it, right? And so you've kind of touched on that, right? Which is this idea of once you get that part right, I think you've gotten it right, because it's like the gift that keeps on giving. You all those ideas flow from that
Yeah.
and make sense.
But you
You
have
know?
to be able to get past your personal biases and
Yeah,
what you're trying to validate to yourself, and just look at the bigger picture of opportunity, especially in that beginning stage, because you don't know what you don't know. And if you could just get your ego out of the way and going, what are all the opportunities here? Then you might have a fighting chance. And I guess it'd
yeah.
be useful to have a sounding board or people around you to help with that bridge. So tell me a bit about the Investor Impact Accelerator.
Well, this actually came from exactly the this came from a gap that it took us a while to acknowledge, and then a, a little while to fill, which was that because we've had a seat at the table across a range of ventures, right? And you know, um, we've seen, yeah, the good and the bad and the ugly. Uh, and oftentimes also seen sort of advisors swoop in at various times, right? Um, and give really bad advice that was taken and run with. Um, Even though we deeply sensed it was the wrong advice. So, for example, it's usually advice that steps on our toes, right?
Yeah.
Meaning it's someone who comes in and goes, "Oh no, you're going to need to do this for the round," and so pivot and rename everything or change story completely. It's bad advice. It's like fundamentally bad advice, particularly for companies that already have a long media history. So say if our company has been out there and has 5 years of, AFR stories, renew economy stories, say it's a clean tech, and its name is linked to those stories, right? It has a you don't want to turn that off, and unless you really need to,
Mhm.
you want to build on it. You want to make sense of it, and you can, right? You can easily do that. There's lots of strategies that you can use to bridge from one iteration of a company, to its next sort of iteration or incarnation. There's ways to do it, but basically, so we'd be watching this, and what we couldn't say, right, hand on heart, and I can't say this, is, oh, I've got an MBA, or I can, you can send me your financials and I can figure everything out from there, right? I can't say that, right? Instinctually, I I have a pretty good, and probably commercially, I have a pretty good way of reading where a company's at.
Mhm.
But so this represents a, a filled gap, right? Because we felt disempowered, right? And frequently we would watch something go wrong and we couldn't really intervene because we couldn't just say, like, slam our hand on the table and say, guys, this is wrong, because we couldn't say why.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I
Yeah,
couldn't quantify
because
why.
and I think the other part of that, Jonathan, is that they see you as an integral part of your business, but just one part of your business. And if they're looking to secure funding or develop new strategies, they might look for the outside source. So what I've loved
Yeah.
what you've done is partnering with Lucrum Ventures. I think
Yeah.
I'm saying it right.
That's right.
And that's right. And you put the accelerator, the Investor Impact Accelerator together. And I'm just going to read this, but what you're actually building is strategic storytelling with brand positioning, investor engagement, capital market readiness, and evaluation, M&A, and exit strategy support. So
Yeah.
what you're actually doing is bringing this whole solution together. Is that we're going to help you not control, but own and control the narrative, build the story, build the fan base, build the why, build your mission, the purpose. We also have this whole strategy with a trusted partner, and they're going to help facilitate, negotiate, and support you through the whole process along with us as part of the journey, which helps you as well as an equity partner. I love it. I love what you put together here. I think it's really, really smart.
I'm happy to hear that. Look, we've used it to great effect pre-launching it, right? So we were doing some ad hoc, selective cases where we're kind of testing it out. And I think in 2026 we'll be, ramping it up more seriously. But Cameron and his team are bringing, just deep insight into the fundraising space, the ASX space, right? So there's this listing concept. And I think what's was exciting for me, and it kind of is full circle with when I was talking about the cybersecurity piece in the beginning, the one that made me, right, leap and start AndIron, was the exit piece. Because we've been across a number of exits now, and the value of comms in the ramp up to those exits is like, there's no question it helps. Like, I've seen it again and again. So now, by the way, as a Marcoms uh, practitioner, an advocate, I will also say if you do not have the commercials, right, no amount of marcoms, no amount of movement, no amount of good faith is going to save your ass. Nothing's going to save you, right?
Yeah.
Like at the end, and that's where my my chartered accountant friends and my CPAs that are asking for the ROI, they're right. Like they are right in that if you don't have that, you are going to be constrained. Not only that, I mean, it's existential, right? You could go out. I've had experience with that recently, and it was with one of our companies, and that you mentioned, and it was incredibly painful. It was yeah, and it was effectively a cash piece, um, and it's very strong brand, but um, when you're up against the cash crunch and you can't get investment in quickly enough, it's a challenge.
Mm.
But yeah, yeah. But I mean, that said, right? When you've got things flying, right? Or everything's kind of aligned. You've got a great commercial model. It's working, or you're pre-right. I mean, you've got a business, right? You've got a business that's really working. The comms piece on top of that, in the run up, particularly it depends on the kind of company as well.
Mhm.
Like if it's an advisory company, we've been across some of those. Well, then if you're an advisory company, right, just my opinion, right, but you have no thought leadership presence. I don't actually like the term thought leadership, but you don't have that presence.
You're not contributing,
Yeah, like
yeah,
you're not
or
contributing like
providing
like
value, I guess. So, yeah.
this is like it's kind of like, that's an unforced error. Like you should have that.
Yeah.
Um, and and you're not in there. Um, it's not that helpful, right? I mean, but a good comms program, and I think you alluded to this, right? Whether it's on or off, you'd said this, like a good comms strategy. Well, you'd really want it to be um multi-pronged. So ideally, you really have new business wins, right? You have case studies going out. You're pulling all these levers all at the same time, right? You've got commentary pieces. You've got speaking. You've got awards
Testimonials.
being won. You
Yeah.
know, one. If this is a value bomb, hopefully it'll save people in the audience some money. That is almost inevitably when we come into a business, if there's been some marketing kind of um, fumblings around, it often is involved around, oh, we need to be at this trade show and we need to pay this money for this booth. And honestly, often you have to make a hard case for me to accept that buying a booth at almost any trade show at an early stage is worth it.
Yeah.
I've seen it valuable for later stage companies, very specific verticals, but for the most part, it's 25 to 50 grand that you do not need to spend uh, early on. So it might make you feel good, but your feet are going to be sore. You're going to get, you know, hardly any leads, most
Look, it's
likely.
it's a high five for a week and a half as you roll through your LinkedIn and Instagram feeds, and then you look at the
Exactly.
return on investment. You go, "Oh, it wasn't quite there." No, the reason why is nobody had heard of you. They don't know your backstory. There's no trust built. There's not enough evidence built for to help them make a decision, and they need 7-11 times to hear about you to before even consider working with you. You had one more value bomb that you said at the beginning is like getting in too early or something like that, or getting combs out too early. You said I'd say it later. Do you know what that was?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, definitely know this one. This goes to uh, uh, early on, um, was called in to a company, and they had availed themselves, right, of mates rates PR, right, where they were building a technology platform in for retail, and it was pretty smart idea, right? But they went out as as if they were launching it, right? platform. And so they launched it and they went to like all the tech journalists in Australia and they got savaged, right? They also happen to have a very unique name. So when you search them, there was no way that they were ever going to get out from under the SEO power of these major tech journalists savaging their product, right? There's just no way. So I looked at this and I said, guys, we got to change your name. Like we have to change the name of your company. And what's
Witness
ironic,
protection program. We're moving you to Ohio.
it's so
Like,
true. Like it was so true. It was a better name in the end too, because actually the name that they'd had originally, there were a few lessons in this one. The name they had originally was a name that wouldn't have played well in America because it had another meaning. And I was like, well, that wouldn't have done well anyway. Um, but yeah, the other lesson was that a lot of these things, they're nuanced, right? Like, had you gone out to those tech journalists and said, hey guys, this is the beta version. We're
yeah,
launching the beta,
keen
right?
for your feedback.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like you build relationships, maybe you get a story, right? Maybe you don't, but you don't, you've already set the expectation. But they were, if you go out and this is actually thematically tied to that idea of that what you'd said as well, the ego of the founder, right? Who's who they're champing at the bit that no, I've won this business, so I should announce it, whatever, this, large enterprise. Same thing. Like it's like just a slight nuance. And
yeah,
you know, you have resetting expectations, and you're
yeah.
gonna have a different outcome, you know?
So the lesson from that is build the relationships, test the
Yeah.
waters without putting all your chips in.
Yeah, yeah, be able to exactly. And so there's a lot of this, those very small iterative pieces that will make a big difference
Mm,
in the way you frame stuff. It's the same with we do a lot. Um, I've always been fascinated by data, using data in media stories and in dreaded thought leadership, things like that. But because a lot of the companies we work with are at the nexus of their industry, right, and the wider public, and they happen to be sitting on sometimes proprietary data that is really it's quite unique, right, and it can give insights into wider areas and
hmm
issues. And so journalists can find that really interesting, right? Because they're going,
mm,
oh, right, like you're learning this, but it actually suggests this other thing. Um, and with those, it's quite with those cases, it's quite interesting because oftentimes, well, first of all, a lot of organizations don't realize the value of what they're sitting on from a media point of view, the data that they're sitting on. But the second thing is they oftentimes don't know how to frame it, so they feel they can't use it at all, you know?
yeah,
So there are ways of framing it. They're like, for example, someone will go, oh no, we have it. It has to be perfect. No, it doesn't have to be perfect. If it's better than what's out there, right? And you're
yeah,
saying we're always working on its accuracy. That's all you have to say, right? I mean, you just go, well, it's in development, but this is kind of a first blush read on this particular data set or this phenomenon, right? Like you don't have to get it all right.
yeah.
Um, and
I love
again,
that.
that's setting expectation, right? So yeah.
Yeah, and I think there was someone I was talking to who specializes in just awards nights. He said, never
Yeah.
miss the opportunity. If you're nominated for an award, do a post about being nominated, then do one about the awards, whether you won or lost, and then do one, thanking for the nomination, even if you lost. You got three pieces out of one act. So, it's
Uh,
never miss that opportunity.
yeah, well, it's funny, Sean, in preparing for this, you'd said, you actually said, well, how a few takeaways. And so I pulled up a slide that we use, which is the use the whole fish slide.
Oh,
And
yeah, yeah.
it's what it is about is it's a phrase we use a lot, which is you've got all these different elements, right? So say that data piece, like what you just said, right? Absolutely, right? You've got people will go, no, we didn't win, so we're not even going to talk about it. You're like, hang on a second. If you post before the actual award, no one in the world knows whether you won or not. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. And it gives you a
Like
chance to tell
you
the
don't
story of why you're nominated in the first place, even after
exactly.
post the awards.
Exactly. So it's again, it's about taking kind of ego out and just looking at it very, just from a neutral information point of view, right? To some
Yeah.
extent. But so the whole fish piece I was going to say was that, you know, there's not one of the tendencies, particularly again when you're really, you want to drive your company, you want to grow it, is I think I'm sure you've seen this, is that you see is on a silver bullet. You think it's going to be this one thing or this other thing, and there isn't that I
Yeah.
could see a single bullet. So there's not going to be, for example, like someone might come to us and then they'll go, oh, but it's either what you're doing or digital marketing. We're like, well, digital marketing could be part of what we're doing, depending
Yeah.
on if we think it's a lever to pull or not. But that's not really the point. It's not, you're not going to achieve what you think you're going to achieve in one silo. Like you're just
Yeah.
not.
And without a
Um,
strategy, rounded strategy
without
behind it.
strategy, exactly. And so it's always about looking at what you're sitting on and then going, all the information, all the data, your story, all of that, and going, how do we carve it up? Right? How do we deploy it?
Mm.
um, once you've yeah, identified it. So yeah, I feel like I've been doing a lot of talking. I'm sorry,
Well,
and
I'm not
not
going to let
hearing
you off
enough
the
from
hook
you.
either. We're
Okay.
almost out of time. So what
Yeah.
we'd like to do is we finish off with 4 to 5 questions because I know you're going to have to head off soon. But this is the rapid fire section. So
Oh
in one
God.
word or one sentence, the
Okay.
question will
Okay.
pretty much dictate.
Yeah.
So one decision you're most glad you made in your career.
Ooh. Coming to Australia.
Yeah, it's a pretty special place. One mistake you'd love other founders to skip on and when it comes to comms and or marcoms.
Oh. Oh God. I'm sorry. I'm getting too thoughtful here. Um,
I think
you
you've
can
shared a couple
you can always
or
you can always condense this. I would say neglecting and or rushing into the communication and branding foundations.
yeah, I think that's solid. That's good. I'm not going to shorten that at all. One simple question every founder should ask before amplifying their story.
Why am I different?
Mhm. And where's the best place for people to follow AndIron or connect with you and learn more about how you can help them?
Look, I think just go to the website, andirongroup.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, and we also have launched a podcast this year, which I perhaps I should have you on there, Sean. It's called Death by Burning, and it's not exploring startups as such. It's exploring the idea of heresy as a value, the idea of people who do or look at things differently to the crowd in such a way that they oftentimes get burned at the stake or in the court of public opinion. So
That sounds fascinating. I'm looking forward to diving into that as well. Jonathan, thank you so much for jumping on with us. It's always great to see a fellow North American and share the stories. And yeah, we both made it to a better part of the earth. Yeah, it's been fascinating meeting you. And yeah, thanks for your time.
yeah, great meeting you too, Sean. Thank you so much for having me on.
And for our viewers and listeners, thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Unicorn Ventures. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. All the best. Bye.